Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 44.
44.
Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing.
Me too.
This week, Jonathan Glazer's The Zone of Interest.
Yep.
A film that we've been very much looking forward to discussing on Cineboys to Cinemen. As it's a Jonathan Glazer film, we're going to have a little natter about his career.
Yes.
He's someone that pops up with a film and then just disappears for what feels like a lifetime.
Yeah, he directs
again.
Yeah, he directs a lot of music videos and stuff.
Oh yes,
he did like an Apple Watch commercial.
Oh, did he? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair enough. I mean, like maybe he just sort of spends most of his time thinking like, right, time to get the money for that shed I've always wanted, and then like occasionally just dreams up this sort of really unique project. So yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, a really interesting filmmaker in the sense that at first glance, at least, it's really hard to sort of see a thematic through line through his films.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's really interesting about him. We'll go into that in a bit more detail.
Oh, all right then.
And as of course, Zone of Interest is a film about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
We thought we'd talk about other films that tackle this period of history. Mostly, I think, well-known examples, Bar one. But
okay, yeah, I think I might know which one you mean.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of them.
No.
Surprisingly little. After I quickly Googled it about 5 minutes ago, I was like, there's not as many as I thought. And I mean, obviously, it's like an unspeakably tragic and violent event that happened. So it's hard to make anything with sort of commercial prospects in mind like that.
Yeah.
So that might be why.
No, it's interesting you say that about the commercial viability of the film, because on the lead up to the film and having sort of many conversations with different people about it, quite a number of people have said that doesn't sound like my kind of film.
Right, yeah, okay, yeah.
And whilst I obviously think that people that say that, it doesn't mean they're not considerate about that period of history or think about that period of history, but I think it's important that these films exist for that reason, because as we've said in the Napoleon episode, that, you know, for a lot of people, it's like films or TV shows that are going to be the only real way that people engage with a period of history.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. And also with this film in particular, and with a lot of films that sort of centre around the Holocaust, there's sort of timeless themes that are still very relevant today. And we'll go into that in a lot more detail with Zone of Interest in particular.
Yeah, agreed.
But which is, I mean, another reason why I think they should be seen, because they are. It's not like going to a museum. There's something in there which you can kind of learn from, you know, based on your own sort of behaviour and how you kind of interact with the world, I think. So, yeah. Yeah,
agreed. Shall we start on Jonathan Glazer?
After the
little jingle.
Yeah,
cool.
Which I'll play right now.
Questing the cinematic void. Jonathan Glazer, then.
Yes.
Alluded to in the intro, a filmmaker that it's hard to pin him down in terms of thematic through lines, even sort of stylistic.
He's not Tony Scott, is he?
No.
It's not like instantly recognisable when you're watching one of his films.
We've talked about this in the context of filmmakers like James Mangold.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who are like filmmakers who just work on across like a broad sort of
genre hopping. Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it's sort of like, even though there might be some sort of elements that, you know, if you're a bit more keen-eyed, you'd see like throughout all of his films, it's quite hard to sort of say like outwardly, oh yeah, this is a James Mangold film.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not to his detriment. I'm sort of very sort of appreciative of that kind of director that just takes the source material and makes sort of creative decisions based on that material, you know.
Yeah.
There's not like a sort of auteurist flair.
They're not spitting in their watercolours, are they?
No,
like
yeah, exactly. So I just think it's interesting when you think about someone like Jonathan Glazer, who's obviously I would argue, is on the outside of the studio system, really. I mean, I know obviously he secures funding from various areas within the studio system, as all independent filmmakers do, or the vast majority.
Yeah.
But this is someone that doesn't really make films that are as pre-concerned with profit as much as Mangold does.
Yeah, definitely.
And again, I'm not sort of ragging on Mangold. I'm just saying that whilst there are similarities in terms of like the way in which they make very different feeling movies. I would say, you know, Glazer's films are a lot less sort of concerned with generating high revenue.
Yeah, absolutely not. I think that's the difference. Like Mangold, you could see him as a director for hire. I think he is more than that, and I think he's it's quite bold in some respects.
He's made some very good movies.
Yeah, and some lesser known ones as well, which haven't done so well. So, but regardless, it's always like, I feel like, he could be considered a safe pair of hands, Mangold, whereas Glazer would, that's a hard sell, right? Yeah, apart from maybe Sexy Beast. But even then, that, if you read the screenplay, because upon hearing the premise, you probably think you had got another Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels on your hands.
Yeah, sort of tinged with blaxploitation, right?
Yeah. But actually, that's not the case at all. And once you read the screenplay, you'd probably be sort of feel a bit cheated almost. So, fair play to him for sticking to his guns, really. I want to point out now, I haven't seen Birth. Have you?
I have seen Birth, yeah.
It's with Nicole Kidman, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know much about it other than everyone hated the ending. Was that right? Or it was very polarising? Yeah,
it's a polarising movie. I think it's, in my mind, when you stack it against his other three films, like, it's definitely the weakest.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't a valuable addition to his filmography. It's just that I hold his other films in such high esteem that, Birth isn't isn't as good, in my view. But I think you're right in that he is very good at working within genres and almost, like you say, sort of cheating the genre with his style and his approach. He's a very art house filmmaker, isn't he? I think that would be.
Yeah.
I sort of always try and refrain from using those kinds of sentiments about people, but I think.
Oh man, they're hard, especially. Something Under the Skin, which I'm sure we'll natter on for a long time later on. There are elements to that film which, at surface level, feel very mainstream, right? So casting, for example, is like Scarlett Johansson and the kind of the science fiction elements. But then you watch it and you're like, Jesus Christ! Like, this is so abstract. And you see the Blu-ray and you see like the artwork surrounding it and you think you know what you're in for, and then you kind of get something entirely different. And he's great at that. The same happened with the Zone of Interest for me as well. I thought I was going to get something entirely different. Even though, despite the fact that I knew the method, like his approach for it and like what he did with the cameras and stuff, which again we'll talk about a bit later on, but I knew all that, and yet I got something entirely different from what I expected. He's one of the best people for that, for sure.
I really find it baffling that he isn't sort of considered in that sort of pantheon of great directors, that sort of great directors discussion. Like, his name never really comes up, and yet for me, he's made some of the most significant movies of the last sort of 20 years. Maybe it's something to do with how prolific he is. Yeah. Because you get filmmakers like David O. Russell, who I don't like nearly as much as Glazer, and yet he sort of films. There was a spate of his films being like consistent Oscar nominees. Right? And he comes up an awful lot more than Glazer ever would. Maybe just courts those circles more readily. He comes across quite a sort of like an acerbic individual. David O. Russell. But he seems to be in the right circles because, you're right. Every time he makes a fucking movie, it's like
even the shit ones get Oscar tipped.
And
they briefly get, before everyone realizes that they're not very good. Like Amsterdam was like, "Ooh, bail for another Oscar." You're like, oh no, wait a minute, it's dreadful. Apparently,
it's all about spanking the monkey for me.
No, I haven't. No.
Yeah,
to think about that for a while. Have I seen Spank the Monkey?
That's a good movie.
Okay.
More in the vein of Harmony Korine films.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
In terms of subject matter.
Oh, okay.
Won't go into it too much. It would feel a bit sort of crass, given this is a discussion that's going to go into, about Holocaust. And start talking about the subject matter of that film. But I would advise people to check that out.
Oh, really? Okay.
I also think, going back to what you said about Scarlett Johansson's casting, I think that almost supplements that sort of that approach. He's creating expectations based on star power, and completely subverting them in the way he frames her and the way she performs her character. If we talk about, the sort of through lines through his work, which are, again, like I said at first glance, sort of a bit harder to find, but, if you watch interviews with him, he's very much into that sort of forensic sort of cinematography. There's sort of distant cameras that are just observing the action, or if they are close, there's something inherently uncinematic about them. Like, I'm thinking about the way the cameras are positioned in in the alien Scarlett Johansson character's van.
Oh yeah,
you know, it's almost like a dash cam that you would see in like a sort of like video of like, you know, when someone has like a traffic accident. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's something very
police
sort of,
interceptors kind of thing.
Yeah. There's like something very mundane about the way he positions the cameras, particularly in the interior of the van. And the act of putting Scarlett Johansson in a white van and driving her around Edinburgh. Is it Edinburgh?
I think is it Edinburgh or Glasgow?
Edinburgh or Glasgow.
Yeah. I can't actually remember.
I think it's Edinburgh because there's lots of Hibs fans, and I think Hibernian's Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Footy knowledge. But you know, there's just something about that immediately is completely in line with the film's themes about this otherworldly being examining humanity from a distance.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that you've got this superstar A-lister sex symbol, you know, driving round in a white van.
Yeah.
Around, you know, in a place that, even though it's in Scotland, is sort of, certainly for British people, is, you know, there's a sort of familiar greyness in the weather and a familiar architecture that it's such a bold yet ultimately incredibly rewarding experiment.
I think so, yeah. I mean, just the bits I'm thinking when she stops and chats to people.
Yeah.
How they got away with that, because she was like astronomically famous.
Yeah.
I think he's relying on people's kind of initial goodwill. When someone approaches you and asks you a question on the street, the first thing you think isn't, do I know, you know, like, is this person famous? You're kind of baffled by their immediate presence, aren't you?
Yeah.
And you kind of really quickly have to fumble around in your thoughts, like, especially if they're asking for directions or stuff.
Yeah.
Directions and things like that. And so he's relying on that behaviour to get like these really natural reactions from people, despite the fact he's cast Johansson in the lead. And her kind of, I mean, she dyed her hair black in the film, so that might mask her identity a little bit, but more, she's not in heavy makeup or anything. She's just kind of glammed up a little bit and is...
Yeah, it's almost like there is like a sexualization of her, but I think it's through the prism of like every day. It's not like, you know, someone like Scarlett Johansson, it's like, you know, like many sort of sex symbols, they're sort of doomed to be put on this pedestal. And they're almost like aliens, you know, these sort of higher beings that, like, you know, that no one is worthy of, you know. But the way that Glazer and obviously the sort of costume and makeup department almost ground her beauty, not completely, because her beauty is really important to her character, because it's her beauty that entices the men that she then uses,
and also is ultimately
for meat.
That's right. Yeah, it's also ultimately what I like, kind of it become like sort of feels human through her beauty. Isn't it? That scene where she's looking in the mirror and she's just like transfixed by her own reflection. And that's the kind of moment when you kind of think, because although ultimately this is on a rewatch that I kind of thought this was the theme, because you don't necessarily know she's an alien until right at the end. Spoiler. No. But I think it's just brilliant how he kind of uses that casting for those purposes. And it just enhances the project and also gives it some kind of commercial viability as well. Not that was, presumably that wasn't the intention, but
I think it's sort of a comment on that commercial viability, I think.
Yeah.
And I really like that he brings that sort of, you know, there is conflict in the film between the mainstream and the independent and the art house, and it's playing out in the characterization of Scarlett Johansson and in the way in which he, you know, brings this sort of style of cinematography to landscapes that are just so sort of, you know, we're used to seeing with such uncinematic eyes, you know what I mean? Because, you know, day-to-day life just has a habit of like depriving any sort of landscape of like its cinematic qualities, and he sort of simultaneously uses that whilst being cinematic. I don't know. It's really strange.
Definitely. I think the film gets more cinematic as she starts to feel more human.
I agree.
That's what I think. Like, because it ends in quite a beautiful forest when it's snowing, doesn't it?
And as she's driving into the sort of
the locks,
like it's beautiful, beautiful shot.
But the bits at Edinburgh, I agree, they're like urban, gritty dash cams sort of thing.
There's even like mention of it in the script.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
you've read it, haven't you?
Yeah, I read it
yeah.
periodically. I just think, I think it's pretty obvious that I adore the movie. I think it's really a really significant work and one of the great works of like the last 20 years for me.
Yeah,
and I went in expecting not so little by any stretch, but I didn't expect to be bowled over as much as I was by it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just love it. I think I don't know. I just think it's a really really special film. I think for those reasons we've just mentioned about the sort of the way in which he's almost playing out this sort of like cultural, not battle, because although it probably does feel like a battle for him and many filmmakers who try and like push the envelope and try and secure funding for projects that don't have like superheroes in, it must be really difficult, like especially at the moment where everyone's super guarded about losing any money. So it probably does feel like a battle, but it's not sort of overt. It's tucked away behind like a really sort of powerful, quite simple story about an alien becoming captivated and subsequently desiring to be human.
Yeah, man.
Captivated by humanity and then wanting to be human. Sorry. Yeah.
There's some great moments in it where she's sort of preying on men, and she's managed very easily to sort of entice them into her sort of web. And I don't know if it's meant to be her spaceship, but it's like a dark room that's and there's about a foot of water.
Yeah, it's like a thick, like black, sort of viscous oil, like liquid.
And these men are following her through this kind of increasingly deep chasm of sort of swampy darkness. And the way that there's like a cut in it where this bloke basically implodes and it's only his skin left.
Oh yeah.
And then there's a sound effect which he uses this kind of weird sound design trick throughout a lot of his films, including Zone of Interest, where it's not music, it's just like a knock. It's like a knock on a drum. Yeah. And it's so like disturbing.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a grandfather clock is slowed down. And it's so effective in kind of making you really quite uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it takes it that was the sort of final. It's the final nail in the commercial coffin. when that starts, you're like, yeah, okay, this is something else, isn't it? No, I agree. I think it's great.
Mika Levy with the score, also in Zone of Interest as well.
I really same score.
Yeah. She's
very very understated sort of music.
Yeah, she did the score for Jackie as well.
Oh really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you can see the sort of through lines, particularly like the use of sort of shuddering string instruments, but not as present in Zone of Interest.
No, Under the Skin has moments of like kind of looped violins and stuff.
Yeah.
Like again, very
brilliant score.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah. Oh man, I know it's sort of almost a staple of this podcast to recommend any film we're talking about, but if you haven't seen it, it's really, you'll be really surprised and rewarded. It's just a great experience. Only like 90 minutes as well.
Yeah, it's lean. Yeah,
which is good.
It's a lean beast.
Says what it needs to say.
But it's interesting that we talk about that idea of expectation, and if you think about it in the context of Sexy Beast, you know, talking about blaxploitation, and you said Lock, Stock, there's a real, this idea that films that precede the release of a movie, all it has to do is sort of touch these films, at least in terms of like, genre, and albeit through like the actor that's playing the lead role. Like you think of Ray Winstone, you think of films like Scum.
Yeah.
So there's like an expectation that film is almost going to continue this sort of grand overarching narrative in his career, which is just to sort of like ebb it out playing these kinds of characters.
Yeah, no.
And I love that Glazer, picked him for that and just did something so much more interesting with it.
Yeah, man. It's been a while, but I saw it at university actually. I rented it out on the library had films, and they'd be kind of unmarked, like just sort of Times New Roman. It just said Sexy Beast on it. That was the first and I think only time I've watched it actually.
Yeah, I haven't seen it for about 5 or 6 years.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But yeah, it's a brilliant film. Obviously Ben Kingsley as well, superb.
Yeah, he's the performance that kind of gets singled out.
Yeah,
but Ray Winstone's terrific in it as well.
Yeah, he's really good in it. Yeah,
And it's just surprising how kind of enthralling the plot becomes, and it's not like a sort of Slayer in Marbella sort of thing.
No.
It's very, very much quite sad in places, and like often really funny as well.
It's almost a comment on that sort of Slayer and Marbella.
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
thing, isn't it? I think we've sort of talked about that in the context of blaxploitation, but the idea of those films is to sort of strip away complexity in favour of sort of placating this sort of bizarre sort of power fantasy that a lot of English men in this context have.
Yeah.
And I think Sexy Beast is really good at sort of subverting that. Yeah, good film.
No, yeah, and I haven't seen Birth. I know that it's about a woman whose husband passes away, and then her child reveals themselves to be their husband reincarnated, right?
Yeah. It's I haven't, again, it's something I haven't watched for a very long time, but yeah, it's not my favourite of his.
I've heard it's experienced a bit of a resurgence in recent years, people sort of critically re-evaluating it.
Well, that seems to happen with a lot of filmmakers' work, like with Michael Mann and Black Hat.
Oh yeah.
Because of Ferrari, I think people go back into the director's works and they go, oh, actually, which I really like.
I haven't actually seen Black Hat, but
I have, but can barely remember it. And I bought it recently as a result because I thought I fucking love Michael Mann, and I really love the idea of rediscovering a movie through a different lens.
Okay.
So yeah, but I like that when that happens, and maybe I need to do that with Birth as well. One, because I can barely remember it. This is going to make this part of the podcast scintillating to listen to. But also because I love that process of rediscovering movies in a different way, and it does make you realise the sort of worth of rewatching movies. Because I can be quite bad for that. I can just be like, I've watched it now. It's done for at least a year or two. I need to keep watching more films.
Yeah.
But when you rewatch them, you've almost you become more intimate with them and you understand them more and you can remember little details.
Yeah, if you've maybe explored some of the director's other work since and you go back and revisit it, like that happened with me with Fincher recently in Girl with Dragon Tattoo. I was like, that's incredible, yeah. And I've mentioned that already and I probably can't stop banging on about it now. But it's that kind of same idea of sort of once you're in tune with their method, then you can go back and rediscover and find something else that you've missed.
Yeah. It's a very cold movie, I remember thinking.
Birth, okay. I remember the poster is shit. It's like a shit poster, very much of its time.
Yeah. Is it the same poster as the one that's on the front cover of the DVD?
Yeah, it's like a kind of floating head of Nicole Kidman at the top looking kind of off into the distance, and then a house underneath.
Oh yeah,
like it really.
That's familiar. Yeah,
it really looks like a forgettable mid-2000s kind of supernatural thriller that nobody went to see. It doesn't. The marketing just didn't help. I think maybe if they had considered that a bit more. Also, something weirdly off-putting about Nicole Kidman's hair in it. I don't know why. Her hair, she's just short hair. I don't know, it doesn't suit her. I think she looks much better with long hair.
Take that.
Yep, maybe I'm wrong.
Early to mid-2000s Nicole Kidman.
Yeah. Such a stupid gripe.
Catty put down.
I know, yeah. I felt quite bad now. Sorry, Nicole, who presumably is listening.
Every week it's a different. We rag on a different celebrity and then say, "Oh, they're probably listening."
Yeah. Oh god, yeah.
No, I love it.
Keep it in.
Yeah, keep it in. There's a cinematic detachment, I should say, in his films that I think is something that you can notice.
Yeah.
But it's something in that detachment. As we said, the forensic use of the forensic cinematography, should I say, and the way it sort of just analyzes. It almost feels like it's being watched by like a panel of like sociologists or something, as opposed to an audience.
Yeah.
And there's something about that experience as a viewer, and I think it almost allows more freedom from the performance perspective, because it's not sort of there's not as much tied up in like blocking. It's almost like you're just gonna act normal, and it's used in zone of interest. I mean, so much of the footage was taken from cameras that were just sort of mounted at various points of this house, and they were just doing like day-to-day stuff. And it's about their interactions, and
it is unique. It does make it very kind of like, you're observing the day-to-day existence of someone, and that's true of Under the Skin as well to an extent. There's a spin on Under the Skin, which is based on a novel, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think, which is quite different. It's a lot more overtly science fiction, I think.
Yes, I do actually. Weirdly enough, I have it. My nan gave it to me because I think my granddad read it years ago.
Yeah,
quite a long time ago. Yeah, and I remember her saying it was quite different to the film. I think the film strips a lot of the sort of sci-fi mythology back, and which works the film's
I think so.
Advantage because it's not about the sort of looming sort of sci-fi narrative. Fact it's about this singular tale of humanity.
And
that makes it makes way more sense to relegate all that science fiction stuff, which you can find in any other science fiction movie, or indeed the book if you're that interested.
I think the book, if I remember correctly, because I've read about it a little bit. I haven't read it, but I've read about it. Is that there's a lot more about the harvesting aspect of it, and it's about like kind of using men as literal meat.
Yeah, because human meat's a delicacy, right? To this alien civilization.
That's it. Yeah, but I just think it's great that what he saw in that book wasn't that at all. It was this sort of journey to humanity. Like, I like the idea that he kind of like most filmmakers would probably think it right. We'll do it from humans going to another planet and exploring it and kind of taking over like a colonial. And I like the idea that he thought, no, what if the alien came to Earth and realised that humans were really unique and beautiful
through the process of eating them, or at least harvesting them.
And the way he shoots it, like, he's going back to what you were saying about the forensic nature of his sort of cinematography. It's just lends itself so well to the themes. And I know this is a technique he's began to explore a lot more since Birth, but pretty much right. It sort of started with Under the Skin, where there were sort of portions of the film that were filmed effectively kind of incognito. He just I think he mounted a couple of cameras inside the van, and you can tell because the ISO's not quite right in some of them. They're a bit grainy, and like you were saying earlier, the sort of dash cam thing, but not so much in Zone of Interest. I think he kind of embraced that whole hog and really ran with the idea of being an observer. And not getting swept up in a story of kind of sitting back and and observing it like you're reading a text, like a kind of science textbook.
I think as a viewer, your relationship to his films, it's not, like I said, it's not like you're not being swept up by the narrative or cinematic conventions or anything like that. You're sort of just observing. And I think there's something as a viewer that sort of changes your. It sort of makes you sort of uncomfortable because obviously you're not, certainly from my perspective, I don't feel like I'm qualified enough to observe anybody. But also, like, it's almost sort of strangely discomforting.
Definitely.
In a way, again, that lends itself to the themes of both films really well.
What to point out as well, we're probably painting quite a grim picture if you haven't seen any of his most recent work. They're really watchable.
And again, Sexy Beast is funny. Like, it's a funny movie.
They're just intensely watchable. They're like very engaging. They're not art house in the sense that you're going to be watching like
someone peel a potato for 6 hours.
Or a light bulb swinging back and forth with like some kind of someone's that kind of thing. They're very kind of engaging, watchable, and almost fun viewing experiences.
100%. There's something to be said for feeling those sort of emotions that we've talked about. That can be enjoyable.
Certainly with Under the Skin, like, I've really liked.
I adore.
I think I've seen it about 3 times now, and I can chuck it on. You know what I mean?
Which is a strange thing to say.
It is. I'll chuck it on. Go on. Give that another go. I mean, I don't know if that. Just because of the themes, I don't think that would be quite the same with Zone of Interest. Like, I think that's a little bit less.
No, I think you're right. I think even though the film is it's an incredibly important film, I think you're definitely right in saying that it's not a film that you can just chuck on.
No, maybe not. It's not meant to be either.
No. I think for Glazer to have done that to the film would have done the history a disservice.
Oh, right? That would have been unusual. I think he's really radical in some respects, but not in the sense that it's going to be like a slog.
No.
And I was kind of expecting that with Zone of Interest, and I really hoped that I didn't have my expectations weren't too high, and they weren't. Like, luckily, it was it blew me away in a lot of respects.
My expectations were quite high because I love him, and I think after Under the Skin, I was like, "Ooh," not that I doubted him, I would for any reason doubt anyone really in the realm of filmmaking as someone that just sits on his ass and just talks about it into a cheap microphone, but. I just think, I was really pumped for the film on the basis that it was him.
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously, the thematic stuff, you're sort of very aware that you're going to go into this kind of experience, and it's going to be an experience that's going to weigh on you for a long time.
Yeah, it stayed with me for sure.
And that's the sort of Holocaust films that are the most sort of celebrated for conveying the sort of feelings of the time. They all do that.
Yeah,
and that's what they should do.
Oh, yeah.
Let's sort of have a little chat about some of those films then.
Yeah, okay.
I would wager that the most famous is Schindler's List, right?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I've only seen it once. Obviously, I mean, I think it'd be quite difficult to sort of watch it more than once. I remember it being very long and very. Obviously, Spielberg being Jewish, it felt very personal. I think probably his most personal of all of his filmography, and a real departure from what because when was it? Because
he made Jurassic Park in the same year.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So ridiculously different.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet they both remain very popular and very kind of almost must-sees, right?
Yeah.
For very different reasons. Like one being kind of groundbreaking visual effects wise, and the other being like it is almost the Holocaust film, right? I'd say. Like if I
would say it's the most famous.
Yeah, definitely. Like
I can't think of a film that's sort of like about that period of history that is sort of discussed by so many different people. And I just mean not in terms of like faith, but I just mean like in terms of people that watch movies and people that sort of their relationship with film is a lot more sort of casual.
Yeah,
It's a film that definitely that breaks through that.
Yeah, completely.
In a way that Spielberg does. Spielberg does have this uncanny ability with his films to touch a broader audience.
Yeah.
I think partly down to his name and partly down to the way he's just so good at like making movies that just have broad appeal without not always, but in this instance certainly is the case, without sort of sacrificing the thematic impact.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Which is unusual because my memory of watching the film is quite sprawling. Like it does focus on Schindler and kind of his story, but it sort of drifts between characters. Obviously, you've got like Ralph Fiennes' character as well.
And he's the person that sticks out most for me when I think about that movie.
Oh, really? Yeah, his performance is like horrendous, but horrendously good, as in like you really hate him.
Yeah.
Which is odd because he's not just a villain. He's not typecast as a villain necessarily, is he?
No.
Yeah, my memory of it is, and also the fact that the coat as well, the red coat.
Oh yeah,
kind of through line, and you see her in the cart near the end, and that really hammers home because you spent quite a lot of time with this sort of 3-4-year-old girl trying to evade capture, and then just have it all. You hope kind of, and also she's in the poster as well.
Yeah,
she's holding his thumb, isn't he, on the poster?
Yeah,
and you can see the red coat, and that image of her on the cart at the end really stayed with me as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost courting this idea of the Spielbergian fantasy, which I think audience members, I don't know if they would necessarily expect it going into Schindler's List, but he does something really interesting with that, and that maybe she is going to get out, maybe she's going to be okay, but the grim reality of the situation is that that's just not possible.
Yeah, totally. Your hopes are totally dashed in one shot as well, no dialogue.
Yeah. I mean,
gruesome.
It was a tremendously efficient machine,
and
it's something that Zone of Interest examines really well. The extent to which this mass genocide was so intricately organised and designed. It's just horrifying beyond belief, but it really hammers home how inescapable it was. Because of how well organised and well structured it was, and obviously we don't necessarily see that. We see the outcome of that in Schindler's List.
Yeah.
But that moment with the girl, it's almost like that sort of entertaining this idea that maybe there is going to be some good that comes out of this, no matter how tiny, given the grand sort of scheme of.
Yeah, that's true. Actually,
the thing I was looking it up, and he was sort of using it as a comment about the fact that the Allies knew about what was happening.
Oh right, okay, yeah. What? Who got Spielberg or Glazer?
Well, no, the Allies during the war, they were aware that there was something like this happening.
Are we talking about Glazer here? Sorry, or
no, in terms of Schindler's List.
Oh right, okay,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah. Oh, well, okay, that's why.
Mm.
Oh man, I mean, it's not something I intend to actively sort of revisit, but it might be time, to be honest, because we were talking earlier about, you know, what you were saying about people. I'm not in the mood for that, but it's a difficult one ever to be in the mood for. I feel
Yeah,
you
you're never going to be in
do
the
it.
mood for it. I think I think with those parts of history, you have to confront them.
Yeah,
And I think you have to engage with it. I think it's really important. Like,
yeah,
that's what you should do with history. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff about history that's really fascinating and really sort of like exciting and really engaging, and that's obviously really important too.
Yeah.
But this is recent history. This is like, I was talking to a friend today about it, funnily enough, because they've been to Auschwitz. And,
Oh, really? Okay, yeah.
And she said what struck her was how modern it felt.
Oh, really?
Like the construction of the buildings, and it's so contemporary, and and the idea that this happened, and it almost, and this is something that Zone of Interest, I think, explores, is the possibility of it happening again.
Yeah, it definitely has that theme, doesn't it?
And that's why it's so important that we engage with these kinds of films, engage with the history, because it should prevent us from going down that path of ever happening again.
Yeah.
And so just to say, oh no, I'm not saying that means that you're not compassionate, but I'm just saying that it might speak more broadly to a more sort of wider societal issue with wanting to confront these aspects of history that don't align with a certain worldview or a view of oneself or one's country or one's identity. Like, I think it's really important that these films exist. And continue to sort of hammer home just how horrifying it was.
No, yeah, I think so. I actually want to bring up a couple of other films which fit into the mould of being a Holocaust film. However, they're geared towards a younger audience.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I've got two examples. One you mentioned earlier was The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, the film adaptation of the very famous book. And then The Book Thief.
Which, yeah.
Which they kind of popped into my head as just like, obviously, like you were saying, you need to educate people about what happened because it's very recent, like it's less than 100 years ago, and it's just unspeakably sort of dreadful and a very, like a kind of moral lesson in dictatorships as a whole, as well as kind of man's inhumanity to man and like what can happen, and obviously, religious or cultural groups being persecuted, and like all this needs to be taught, I think, because to ignore it would be doing the lives of these people the ultimate sort of disservice, really. But do you think that the existence of films like Boy in the Striped Pajamas and like The Book Thief, is that diluting it down and diluting the horror down at the expense of the message, or do you think it's crucial that they are?
I think they dramatise it more to make it more palatable for children, don't they?
Completely, yeah.
I think it's tough. I think it's important to understand that children, you probably shouldn't go in heavy.
No, God, no.
But I sort of see where you're coming at. But I think it's important that maybe for kids that they begin to understand this, and as they get older, they can use that experience with those films to inform further research. And then when they get to an appropriate age, then you can be like, right, okay.
Yeah.
Films like Son of Saul, which I want to talk about a bit later on, which are real sort of visceral depiction of day-to-day life in Auschwitz. And because you can study it as a kid and you can read about the sort of the day-to-day nature of living there and the statistics about the sort of the people that were murdered. But I think it's films that can really sort of translate it in a way that, I don't know, like I don't want to say that there's sort of like the stuff that's been written about it or the statistics about it are ineffective, because obviously they're not. But like, I don't know, like again, it goes back to what we were saying before about films and TV being one of the few ways in which a huge percentage of people engage with history.
Yeah,
yeah. And we talked about that in the context of Napoleon, which is obviously a very different movie. But,
yeah.
You know, like, for a lot of people, that's the only way they're going to engage with that. And maybe more people do readily engage with the Holocaust because obviously it's sort of taught in schools and it's sort of more recent history.
It was quite a crucial part of World War II syllabus, I suppose.
Yeah. But no, I see what you're saying, though. Like, I guess there are certain subjects that, you know, shouldn't be sugar-coated regardless.
Yeah, this is what my thought process was just like, obviously the way they're advertised as like young adult novels, right?
Yeah.
The same kind of vein anyway. And it's odd to me that the subject matter can be so unrelentingly bleak.
Yeah.
And yet it's sort of, they receive the same marketing treatment as a film like I don't know, Divergent or something.
Yeah. I see where you're coming. Actually, in that context, I can understand. But then I think about something. This is going a bit off piece, but I think about something like Horrible Histories.
Oh yeah.
Like, they were so formative for me. Getting into history and understanding it and using humour. Obviously, you know, that would be very disrespectful to do that in this context, but the way that they sort of communicate those periods of history, and they do communicate horrible periods of history as well. It's not just like, you know, making jokes about Egyptians or whatever. It's, you know, First and Second World War and all the tragedy behind that, and
the Blitz and stuff.
Right? So like, you know, it can be like a sort of, like I said, like a stepping stone to you know, to being ready to sort of engage with material that's a little bit more unflinching. But I do agree with you that the way that they're marketed throws up some...
It's odd, isn't it? It's just odd to me.
It's potentially sort of morally grey. Yeah, no, I agree.
It's a bad smell. It's just a bad smell.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not saying that, you know, these films shouldn't exist. They absolutely should. And like, I didn't mind The Boy in the Striped Pajamas anyway. I was far too old for it, but I remember, you know, like that Asa Butterfield when he was sort of younger, right before he worked with Scorsese. He was in. Yeah. And I remember they fade to black at the end. Obviously, the kind of horrible conclusion. He follows his mate into the gas chamber, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And the way they handled that was like very kind of almost very sensitive and like, maybe sugar-coated isn't the right phrase to use here, but it is digestible.
It's through the prism of another genre, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think if the intention is still to highlight the horrors of this period of history, and that is, you know, to a certain age group, I think it's just about fine. But I do agree that there is something strange with the marketability. Yeah, I agree. I want to talk about Son of Saul. I think it'd work as an interesting sort of counterpoint to Zone of Interest, because whereas Zone of Interest has a distance that is incredibly effective, Son of Saul has a closeness that's incredibly effective.
Right, yeah.
So, like, it's day-to-day life in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
And I think it's for the Jews who were forced against their will to almost aid or be a part of the process of, like, you know, mass murder and executions, gassing and removing all the bodies and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I think they were called Sonderkommandos.
Right, okay.
I think that was the name given to them, and they were fought again, like, against their will.
So almost was effectively slavery.
Yeah. I mean, basically slaves to a system that is making them
their own kind of religion
like,
and race to getting persecuted and executed.
Yeah,
and they're privy to that. My God, that's awful.
And it's about them. One particular individual who's almost, at least initially, is just so used to it. And that's the real horror. The initial horror is the fact that he's things you've just said there about the idea of, you know, having to, like, move these bodies and sort of, you know, of people that share your faith, a big part of your identity. But he's so sort of disconnected to it on the basis that he's been doing it for such a long time,
really?
Or feels like a long time.
Yeah.
Until he sees the body of a young boy and wants to give this boy a burial.
Okay,
And it's about him working his way through the camp, trying to sort of make this happen and meeting various people.
Yeah.
And it's just, I don't want to say too much about it because I think it's a film that you've said this earlier. We do say this a lot, but it's a film you have to experience. Like I went into the film. It was on Mubi for a time, and that's where I caught it.
Okay, yeah.
And I just was completely struck by the sort of closeness to the whole period of history. It just is absolutely all-consuming. It's a really, really grueling experience.
Right. When was it made?
I think 2015, I want to say.
Oh, because it's reasonably recent then.
Yeah.
So it must have. I was thinking if it was made in like the 70s or something, you'd be right to maybe assume that the people who made it might have had almost a first-hand experience of the kind of the atrocities that happened in the Second World War. But 2015, it must have been like heavily researched, or maybe based on accounts of either relatives or just people, survivors, or anyone. I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
It's so personal, and yet it was made so long.
Yeah,
so much time later.
Yeah. It's clearly the product of extensive research, and I think there's something about just the way, again, in the same way that Zone of Interest does this too, about the sort of day-to-day running. But again, Son of Saul is intimate. It's intimate with the sort of practice of mass genocide,
right? Yeah.
The way people just walk, the cameras. He's so close to him as he's sort of navigating all these people, just working. But no, it's the closest to routine that is most terrifying. It's in that. It's in just the main character as he walks around, has his interactions with people, and it's almost like he's bothering them. He's bothering them out of their routine.
Yeah,
and obviously everyone's aware that this is a fucking like nightmare. This is like hell. This is, the human race has created hell, and it is places like Auschwitz and Dachau and these concentration camps. But it's almost become, again, like the main character, so sort of all-consuming that it's just a day-to-day affair, and people are aware of it, but they're just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And they just work through it.
So it becomes mundane. I think mundane is not the best word to use, but it is almost, there's a mundanity about
there is.
it.
I think that, and again, you're not saying that to...
I don't want to dilute it.
No, but
not
I know
mundane
what you
as
mean.
in like getting the bus every day.
Yeah,
right?
no.
Same. Yeah.
Like there is a sort of mundanity to it, and it's almost like that. Being pulled out of it is jarring. It's like, what are you doing? Also, as well, because the punishments for being distracted are obviously, you pay with your life. They don't care. Obviously, if you just feel you're with someone else. There's millions of people coming in through, again, that extensively planned transportation system into these camps. It's a film that's absolutely worth engaging with, because, and again, it would work well as a counterpoint to this film, because there's a distance and there's a closeness, and it's almost like you can watch Zone of Interest to see one side of the wall of Auschwitz,
then get transported to the other side, to watch something really kind of personal.
It's just all-consuming. It's probably one of the most all-consuming films I've ever seen, or certainly in the last, I don't know, I can't put a time frame on it, but it really, really, really sort of stayed with me for a very, very long time. And credit to Laszlo Nemes, the Hungarian director.
Okay, yeah. So Zone of Interest is definitely, the idea behind it is it forces you to spend time with the family and the man who was effectively like I don't know what rank he was specifically, but
he's like very high up
in the kind of day-to-day running of Auschwitz, and you're privy not necessarily to the horrors that are going on, but to the decisions that are being made that result in these horrors. And also you're also privy to his family and how they're reasonably wealthy. They've got like a very kind of, they've got a nice setup, right? They have like a help, right? They have like servants and stuff. And effectively you're just forced to spend time with these people, and they're dreadful people, especially his wife. I remember really not liking her for some reason. It's her indifference to everything which is the worst, even worse than his behaviour, because he knows what he's doing, but you get the feeling like he's risen the ranks and he's sort of almost, obviously incredibly complicit, but to him it's like it's a military thing. But with her, it's like she's got some humanity, and yet is just ignoring. And she's kind of actively encouraging this guy's career and kind of pushing it forward. And there's a bit with her mum when her mum comes to stay, and she leaves after a night, doesn't she? Because she can hear there's a lot of sound design in this, which is just like really hard to listen to.
Yeah,
because it's the screams. Right?
Yeah, Glazer calls it the other film.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
The sound design. Yeah,
I mean, just the whole thing is like a study on culpability, right? And where does the buck stop? Basically, like if you want to kind of put it into modern terminology, that's kind of how it's presented.
I think what's interesting about it is that in the other films we've discussed, if you think about Ralph Fiennes' character in Schindler's List, or indeed the interactions that the lead character has with the guards at the camp or the SS in Son of Saul, they're obviously framed quite rightly, their behaviour and their attitudes as pure evil.
Villainous, right?
The embodiment of pure evil.
Yeah.
Whereas Zone of Interest certainly has that, but in focusing more on their life outside of the camp, on the periphery of the camp, it almost, I don't want to say humanizes, but it brings you closer to the human behaviours and the sense of humanity that we all feel in ourselves.
Yeah.
And it brings you closer to what we were talking about before, about this idea that how terrifying an idea it is that this can happen again.
Yeah.
And all that needs to happen is the sort of right sort of foundational socio-political and economic situation to befall a civilization or society for these things to become palatable to a entire population.
Yeah.
The mother of the family is a particularly interesting example, because she's obviously someone that's risen from nothing to something, and that rise has happened, that mercurial rise has happened because she happens to be married to someone that is very good at their job.
Yep.
But their job happens to be mass slaughter.
Yep.
But he's very good at it.
Yeah,
and he's been recognised for it, and he is being rewarded.
Yeah.
His service, is being rewarded on the basis that he's given this sort of lavish, these lavish surroundings. Obviously, Auschwitz is next door, which is framed. Yeah. That juxtaposition is deliberate by Glazer, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, historical as well.
Yeah.
Completely. Like there's photos of this family.
I mean, it's just insane, and that's, like you said, it speaks to the idea of complicity more deeply, in the sense that everyone in that house knows what's happening.
Yeah.
But they have allowed the day-to-day mundanity and banality of life to take over so much that they don't need earmuffs. They don't need to. They don't need anything to ignore what's happening.
Yeah, they don't need to
completely happy to ignore it
Yeah.
on the basis that what they're getting from it outweighs any sort of concerns about the ethical implications, which obviously you don't need to ruminate on for too long.
No, yeah,
but they don't need to, and that's what's so terrifying, is that their basic human needs are being met, and that's all they care about.
Yep.
Or not even basic human needs. Their basic human needs are being met, and then some. They're living in luxury.
Pretty much, yeah.
And that speaks to that idea about complicity. Like, all you need is the right sort of circumstances to create this sort of animosity, or to make this animosity more palatable to a population. You don't just rely on things like struggle or fear, but you can rely on aspiration. Yeah. And that can get people to do unspeakable things.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And it forces you to relate in some sense to these characters, because they're going through such things that are kind of inherent in everyone's lives.
Yeah.
Right? Like climbing a career ladder, or at least in the Western world anyway, climbing a career ladder, raising a family,
aspirations, dreams,
providing for your family, getting upset when your significant other needs to move.
Yeah.
It's weird. Like, if you strip away the Holocaust aspect of this film, there's still a film there, and it's a film about a family getting with the threat of getting uprooted. And that's an intensely relatable thing for a lot of people. So it's just mental that there's all these screams going on in the background, and there's a particularly striking moment when the river that they kind of frequently play in and fish in fills with ash and bones, and the way that is it Rudolph?
Yeah.
Yeah, Rudolph kind of reacts to that, and he kind of gets snapped out of his sort of dreamlike lifestyle and has to kind of pull his children out of this cloud of ash that's enveloping them. But how quickly he reverts back to... Instead of that being a kind of... In any conventional film, that'll be a kind of point where the character's morals start to get questioned. But in this, all he does is... he kind of chastises his colleagues.
Yeah, he's more concerned with the malpractice that is that is disturbing his sort of domestic bliss. Or this slice of like natural equilibrium that he's managed to cultivate amongst the horror.
Oh, it's mental, man.
There's something so domestic about it, and it sort of pairs with the way in which they talk about the furnaces that they're going to construct.
Oh yeah,
these radical new furnaces that can
cyclical ones.
That burn constantly, which of course is just used to burn bodies. They're talking about it like it's like some kind of like salesman trying to sell you like a kitchen appliance. There's something and it's just so fucking chilling. And I want to go back onto your point what you were saying earlier about that closeness that you're forced to feel. And that is. Again, we talk about this film being a hard sell. I think that's what makes it a harder sell. People don't want to be able to establish a human connection with someone or a group of people that have done something horrendous. We see this process of dehumanization conducted by the news media about certain individuals that have done terrible things. The idea of them being human is obscene. And the first thing they do is deprive them of that humanity. In the pursuit of, not just selling newspapers, but of making whatever happens to them justifiable in the eyes of the law. Or the vitriol that they've managed to stir up within the general population is justifiable on the basis of what they've done. And the idea of humanizing those kinds of people, the people like in the case of Zone of Interest,
Rudolph and Hedwig, right?
Live like a sort of bizarrely happy life, profiteering off slaughter. The idea of humanizing that is so bold, and again, it speaks to what we were talking about before about about how human it can be. The idea of sort of demonizing the other, be that a different ethnicity or faith, it just brings it incredibly close. And that's the most chilling thing I think about the whole movie. I thought.
It's crazy how easy it can be. Sort of the themes can be transplanted to current events, right? I don't want to mention anything specifically because I'm sure if someone listened to this in 3 or 4 years' time, that those current events will have changed, and yet the film's themes would still be relevant. I think it's gonna be really timeless, and that's a horrible feeling. Like, and it kind of, there's a bit at the end where it we kind of skip to the present day, right? Where all of a sudden it's about 5 minutes of hoovering, right? And they're basically cleaning Auschwitz ready for
visitors for the following day.
And that was kind of what sort of hammered those themes home, as well as that him being unable to be sick.
It's almost as if he's looked into the future and seeing only judgment. And it's this idea that if only we could have the clarity of the future, that would probably influence a lot of the decisions that are made in the present. It's when you just see so much of the vitriol whipped up about the other in our contemporary. In the present, these people are so sure of themselves, they're so sure of their anger, they're so sure of their disgust and their beliefs. But I wonder if they could see, like, into the future. I'm hopeful that there'll be a future of people going, "What the fuck? What was that about?"
We're so different now. There's no way that can ever happen again. These people are monsters. All right, that's sort of.
But the fact that it is. There's potential for it to happen again suggests that maybe that would be a sort of starry-eyed view of things.
Exactly. I found it really interesting, that very ending when because have you seen The Act of Killing? Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
There's a bit at the end of it where end of The Act of Killing where someone was like retching about the sort of atrocities, and something really similar happens at the end of Zone of Interest. but he can't. Like the fact that he can't actually sort of vomit is like all the worse. I don't know. I don't know why that kind of stuck with me. The fact that he just like there's like a very human thing happening there, but the kind of actual act isn't happening. I don't know. Maybe there can just be something else there.
Yeah, it's almost like performative.
Yeah. That's what I thought. I thought it was like it became very theatrical at the end, where he's just going like, "Oh, I won't do the noise." Cause
yeah.
Because you don't want to.
In case you never heard retching.
Yeah. Allow me to demonstrate, but no, yeah, just generally really powerful and very unique, and the way it was shot is great as well. Like, we've talked about the way it was shot. Effectively, it was. I think the idea was to not have any crew. Like they were sort of.
Oh yeah, to enhance the sort of day-to-day feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Crew obviously will. It's the same sort of thing when we talk about like I'll say safely talk about as if we have, but the birth of reality television with Big Brother. Had there been a crew there,
oh yeah, ruined.
It would have ruined it. Right? People would have been more self-aware. But if you put the camera and just leave it, people are aware of the cameras. But as time goes on, the cameras become as normal as the furniture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And this is why the performances are just like excellent, and the reason why is because you can tell that the cameras rarely move. That's one kind
there's
of
no dynamic
thing.
The cameras are very static.
Yeah, and obviously that's sort of part of the parcel with the way it was shot. Yeah, there's something like very naturalistic about the performances, and that's absolutely as a result of the way it was shot. I do find it quite odd sometimes, because in theory acting should be so easy. It's just do what you do already, like live. but of course, as soon as you're being observed, there's a self-consciousness which is incredibly difficult to break, and I think that has been successfully sort of broken. You could probably, I reckon, they rehearsed with the cameras in there as well, like you say, so the cameras become part of the furniture.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's true. I don't know though. I'll look it up later.
It's just it heightens that sort of the way in which we're observing it. There's just a few moments, like everything. Like there's just that bit where one of the older sons is like having like a romantic moment with another girl. It's presumably like the daughter of another sort of high-ranking Nazi officer. Yeah. It's like this sort of bizarrely kind of like sweet, probably quite formative moment for these two children. Yeah. But it's like happening in a house which backs onto Auschwitz. It's like it's sort of like equally otherworldly yet fucking human in equal measure. Like it's just peppered with moments like that. Of course, you've got the more overt moments of like the family like gatherings and Rudolph showing himself to be a relatively dedicated father. But it's the little moments for me that really sort of crystallized the sort of deeply unsettling nature of the film. It's again, we talk about it, it's not just humanizing through a closeness to ideas like aspirations, dreams, hopes, family, etc. It's just the little details. There's little sort of memories, through memory, like we can all attest to having, memories like that in our lives, and the idea they would unfold in places like that.
That's just crazy.
It's just
there are moments of kind of genuine humanity in it, but they're quashed quite quickly. Like there's the apples thing, right? We go briefly back to the apples. There's a girl who is hiding apples for the prisoners to find whilst they kind of work. I think they're like working towards cultivating something, aren't they?
Are they expanding the camp, maybe?
Yeah. And then there's like a bit of throwaway dialogue at the end which just says like, they one of them was like, there was a fight that got broken out over one of the apples and they were both shot. And I was like, so any kind of genuine kind of like more overtly relatable humanity is quickly sort of quashed, isn't it? That's what I took from the apples.
It goes back to what we're saying about Schindler's List, isn't it? It's again this sort of idea that the faintest ray of hope is just sort of like drowned out by the incredibly well organised nature of it. I mean, there's that scene when they're all meeting in that town just outside Berlin, and they're talking about what they're going to be doing, and it's like some kind of fucking board meeting for a sales company. Or something,
it is.
And the way in which it is normalised to get to that point where it feels like that, it's normalised to the point where families can live a relatively happy life on the border of it. That's the horror of it. the horror is the normalcy in which these things are conducted, in which these things happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure there were many people in Germany that were staunchly opposed to it, but out of, again, fear and all that sort of thing quashes that, and people just fall in line.
Yeah.
And it, regardless of what you feel internally about it, if everyone is feeling that way, then it will create a sense of normalcy.
Yeah, yeah.
And even like a sort of apathy towards it, in certain cases.
Completely.
That's what really struck me about it.
Okay, yeah.
And the sound design, again, is, I think we said this earlier, Glazer sort of coined it as the other film.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what's going on, that in Son of Saul. That's why I think this film would be an interesting...
Yeah, right, okay.
But it works so well not to go into it.
It does, doesn't it? It's just, there's like a echo to it.
Yeah.
Which signifies to you that it's far away enough that it's not going to disrupt any... it's not going to be like there's going to be like an explosion or anything. It's far away, and that's what's even worse, because it's like... But you can't help but listen out as well, because you kind of don't want to miss any of it, just in case there's like something that like is quite key to what's going to happen. And there isn't, but like there's moments of silence that are punctuated by effectively screams and burning, which is just and all made it all the more worse that there's the scene earlier where they're talking about the furnaces, and then you start to hear them, and it's just But having said, I mean, it's not a film which is difficult to get through in that respect. It's very, like, I don't want to say watchable, but it kind of, like, similar to Under the Skin, is it's like...
There's a distance that makes it more engaging.
Yeah.
That's a bit of an oxymoron, but...
No, yeah, agreed. And, like, the camera work helps with that. Like, it's always still, and you're always observing. And, I mean, what little plot there is quite zippy.
Yeah.
Yeah, just very unique. I don't think if anything is going to come out like that again for some time, if ever.
No, it's the perspective of the perpetrators, isn't it? Which isn't something you would expect to see. It's through the humanization of aspects of those people that you sort of strike a sort of similar chord with the sort of current situation in our time.
Yeah. Definitely.
And I think that's the ultimate success of the film, is that it, again, you said this earlier on about, to not frame what happened in the right way would be the ultimate disservice to their deaths, to the legacy of this key and horrendous historical moment. If anything, the best thing to do with this is to use it to inform future generations not to fall for the same shit.
I think everyone can probably identify slight, aspects of their own lifestyle which might be not nearly as destructive as the lifestyles of Rudolph and Hedwig, but to a much lesser extent, right down to the sort of products we might rely on or buy, things like palm oil and stuff like that. All of the themes of the film are transplantable to that.
Yeah, that's an interesting
just human culpability in general, right? And to be more careful about that kind of thing, I think is ultimately a very good message. So, like, I do genuinely think Glazer's reaching for something good.
Yeah,
to come out of the release of this.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
In that respect, it's definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, I completely agree. Not only the film is not only valuable as a sort of an exploration of a period of history, it's a mediation on our time in a way that isn't just about the potential for the history repeating itself, but also into other avenues such as consumerism, which I've not considered, but that's an interesting point to pick up perhaps another time.
Yes, absolutely.
Indeed. Outro?
Questing the cinematic void. There we have it then.
Oh, I've passed the torch.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Please go and see the film.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to talk about. I think it's difficult to... So obviously a lot of these the podcast is meant to be quite a joyous affair, but it is quite difficult. I think it's crucial to talk about it, but like hard to word, because you don't want to say the wrong word. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you must see it, because I think it's going to stand the test of time, this one.
I'd be interested to see how it stacks up in the awards season.
Yeah, I mean, it's been nominated, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I just think, again, I sort of don't really give a shit about award season, but I'm just interested to see how this film, because this is a film, I'm interested to see how this particular award season handles this movie.
Yeah, same actually. Yeah,
especially given the competition.
Oh mate, you got Barbie and Oppenheimer.
Yeah,
which have both been nominated as well.
I guess you could sort of could consider Oppenheimer in a vague sense a sort of comparative equal compared to the other films they're up against.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of it being like a recounting of a historical moment, although Nolan's film is definitely more mainstream.
Oh mate, yeah, without a doubt.
In its construction.
I think this has been put forward for best international feature.
Okay.
As well, because it was a co-production. I think it was Polish.
Yeah. Okay. Because it was shot on location, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I think it deserves. I mean, having not seen all of the nominees, but probably does deserve Best Picture as opposed to Best International Feature. It'd be good if it got recognition, but I feel like that might be a little bit of a we've got to give it something kind of thing.
Yeah,
right? Kind of like Scorsese winning for The Departed.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like it's sort of just a recognition, but only because of the difficult subject matter.
Yeah,
we'll see. What happens.
Indeed. Next week, The Iron Claw.
Yes. I haven't seen
wrestling biopic of
yeah.
sorts. I've already seen it.
Yeah.
Saw it in a press screening.
Okay. Oh,
Cineboys. No, we weren't invited for that. No,
I was going to say I had no idea.
Yeah, sorry. Oh God.
Did you wear both press passes?
I did. Yeah. Just managed to get a free ticket through Alex. Cheers,
That's crazy,
Alex.
man.
Yeah. He's so good at just finding deals and stuff. He's a very useful person to have around.
Okay, yeah.
That's not the only reason I keep him around. I love him deeply, but it's definitely a little added bonus. Yeah, I didn't really. I couldn't. I mean, it was dark in there, but I couldn't quite. I don't think many people in there were press.
Right.
I think it was all people like us that just got a free ticket.
Yeah.
But anyway. I digress. As it's a wrestling film, we'll talk about other wrestling movies. A limited pool.
Yep.
But there are some there to chat about. And, of course, wrestling more broadly, because it's such a bizarre and curious phenomena. And I think the Iron Claw does quite a good job of interrogating aspects of that. And, as someone, as a child, was obsessed with wrestling.
Okay, yeah.
It was interesting to see that play out.
I can only think of two: Fighting with My Family and The Wrestler.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if the Scorpion King counts, but I don't think it does it?
Nacho Libre.
Yeah, that's true.
That's another one. Yeah, it's hard. I have to really sit and think about this because, I don't think there's many. Guest.
Yes.
I have floated it out to dear Lee Markham, regular guest.
Big wrestling fan as well.
Yes.
I'm personally not as nearly as much as you two, so I will probably be, my capacity on this podcast will be very much learning from you, if that's all right.
Learning about wrestling.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's weird. Like I do sort of have like a real fondness for it. I mean, obviously a lot of it's based in nostalgia.
Yeah.
I don't really have a clue really what's going on at the moment with it. It's not something I keep abreast of, but yeah, for a period of my life in my young years, it was like a real obsession, And as I've got older, obviously you go through that period where you go, "Oh, that's lame," and you push it away, but you sort of revise it in your mind, not to over-intellectualize it, but you really see it as this sort of bizarre mix of like, I don't know, like circus performance and soap, and also incredibly dangerous. Job.
Incredible.
It seems to attract larger than life characters who go through the wars to keep this sort of bizarre universe going and suffer as a result, as they do in the Iron Claw. So
yeah,
I've already started the episode. I'm so excited. No, I'm really looking forward to talk about that.
Nice.
And we will do so next week, hopefully with Lee.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good.
In the meantime, thank you for listening to this episode.
Yeah, thank you.
Your support means a great deal. We'll catch you in the next one.
See you in the next one.
Cheers.
Bye.